1 week before Governor Scott Walker announces his 2015-2017 budget, 2 days past Governor Walker going to Iowa to impress the conservative Iowa Republicans. 3 days past Governor Walker's decision to shelve a Kenosha casino. It's a great day for Capitol Roundtable. So I want to thank my fellow Capitol reporter, Scott Bauer, Capitol correspondent, the Associated Press, back from Iowa, Matt Dufour, Wisconsin State Journal. Also back from his native Iowa, Patrick Marley, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Well, you two that were in Iowa, let's start there. How did our boy Governor Scott do?
Yeah, Steve, Iowa is all about meeting or exceeding expectations, and that's certainly what Walker did. You know, he came in, a lot of people thinking he wasn't going to be that fiery, he was going to be this Midwestern nice kind of guy.
Sleeves rolled up. Go ahead.
He comes out on stage with his sleeves rolled up, with, you know, sort of roaming the stage, talking about his wife being threatened with being gutted like a deer, and you heard this audible gasp from the audience when he said that, because these people, they don't know anything about Scott Walker. I mean, they know some things, they've heard some things, but he may as well be, you know, Francois Hollande to them. Like, so he had an opportunity here to really introduce himself truly. I mean, people not knowing a whole lot about him, they've heard some things, but and he clearly exceeded the expectation level, which is why conservatives and national media today are talking about Scott Walker winning that day.
But it's a conservative red meat crowd when it's called by Congressman Steve King, the native Iowan. And you, precinct caucuses, Patrick, you and I have worked them. Mm-hmm. I mean, but they're a long way off in January. But go ahead, your impressions of how he did?
Right. It was a very conservative crowd. I mean, you had a lot of presidential candidates, or likely presidential candidates, from Chris Christie to Rick Santorum to Mike Huckabee, the last two who won the last two caucuses. But you also had things like Donald Trump on the stage saying, we can't have Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney tried and failed, and the crowd cheered. He choked. He said he choked and he failed. We can't have a Bush. The last thing we need is another Bush. And this crowd ate it up. So Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney conspicuously absent and not missed by this crowd. So they really did welcome Scott Walker, and he got a very rousing response from the crowd.
So you both agree that he didn't hurt himself. He went the other way. He helped himself
definitely
in Iowa. And let's lay this out. The Iowa precinct caucuses, churches, civic centers, schools, basement of homes, but they're in January. They're a year away.
What's interesting about this is that Walker, I mean, it's not just you come to this speech, you give it, and then you come back a year later and you win the caucus. He's going to have to spend time, you know, going throughout Iowa. He's got David Polyansky, his head guy in Iowa, who helped win Joni Ernst win her Senate campaign. He was also helped Mike Huckabee back in 2008. This is a guy who knows you need to be in those bars. You need to. I think Huckabee went to every pizza chain in all 99 counties or something. I think Santorum did that in 2012 or 2011. So he's going to be visiting the state quite a bit. He said that in his speech.
Well, and Governor Branstad, who I'm showing my age here, I covered him when he was in the Iowa House in 1970 because I'm 1,000 years old. He said you have to go to every one of Iowa's 99 counties.
Yes, he did say that, and he said he does it. Joni Ernst did it. She just won the U.S. Senate race, and Santorum did it 4 years ago. I bet Huckabee had done it. Walker ended his speech by saying, "You'll see a lot more of me, or I'll be back many times." So it's a strategy that Walker has a good geographic a geographic advantage because he's right next door, so he can go down there and do a few counties in a way that Ted Cruz or Rand Paul would have more difficulty with.
Gee, Scott, you were at home with your family. Did you miss all the excitement? Our governor in Iowa?
I don't think there's going to be any shortage of opportunities to talk about Scott Walker in 2016 over the next few months. So it's not even really, it's another step. It's not even really the beginning of him taking a serious look at this thing.
Well, let's talk about how organizations like all of yours are going to cover this presidential. The Associated Press is an international, probably the largest news gathering organization. So all you have to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, be sure we're at the Freedom Summit in Des Moines and then in New Hampshire, right?
We have people in every state. We also have regional political reporters and national political reporters who will all be doing different things related to the presidential race. So I imagine I'll be in Iowa helping out the Iowa reporter, and there'll be people from D.C. coming in. And it's, for the AP, Scott Walker is one of several people running for president. He's not the hometown candidate like it is for the papers covering it. So it's a little bit different perspective.
And Matt, what's a commitment what's the emerging commitment of the State Journal in terms of this presidential campaign?
Yeah, the State Journal is having me cover the presidential run full time. I mean, I'm also going to have my foot still back in some state politics, but they really want me keeping a very close eye on this. You know, as my editor Mark Pitch said, you know, don't underestimate Scott Walker, and I think that's part of the philosophy here is, you know, this guy keeps doing well at every turn, and so why wait until he's declared that he's running for president to start covering him? I expect him to be in the thick of things at least for the next year and maybe longer.
So you're almost packing for the state of New Hampshire?
We'll see. We'll see if our strained newspaper budgets can handle that.
I understand.
We'll
Patrick, Journal Sentinel strategy?
Yeah, we'll be fully committed to covering as closely as we can. We've got 2 reporters here in Madison. Jason Stein and I will be covering it, as will Craig Gilbert out of Washington, D.C. Many of the other folks in Milwaukee will be heavily involved, so we'll watch this thing as closely as we can.
And I'd like to be in the nuts and bolts of coverage. I mean, we're all kind of looking forward to this. How does Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker play on the national stage, and for how long, right?
Well, I was going to say, this was going to be a busy week if Scott Walker wasn't running for president. So, I mean, we got the budget, we got everything I think you want us to get talking about here, but it's just like there's so much going on.
Well, okay, let's, before we get into nuts and bolts of the budget, let's talk about the Kenosha casino decision. My feeling is that Secretary Hipsch, DOA Secretary, had kind of telegraphed it in his letter saying potential drain of, quotes, hundreds of millions, close quote. But is that the real deal? Because he did it one day before he went off to Iowa, where conservatives have said don't approve that casino. So what's the nexus there?
The timing was very curious because you had the governor, depending on how far back you want to go about how he's talked about this casino, it's been a very curious issue for a long time. It seemed like, a year or so ago he was sending clear signals that he would not approve it, putting out daily emails about all the reasons why, all the things that had to be met for him to approve the casino. And then shortly after that you had this change apparently where he was talking about, well, let's try to find a way to bring everybody together and make this happen. And so that went on for a number of months. And then he was saying, well, I've got till February 19th, and we're going to take all the time we possibly can, to look at this and come up with a deal that makes everybody happy. And then the day before he goes to Iowa, where conservatives had said they weren't thrilled about the possibility of a new casino, he abruptly sends out an email early Friday morning and says, I'm denying this request, And so the question came up to him, is this related to you potentially running for president and conservatives saying they didn't want you to approve it? And he said that politics had nothing to do with
Heaven
his...
forbid.
Right. That it was all about protecting the taxpayer. So there's no casino in Kenosha, and we go on from there.
Well, will he pay a political price when Speaker Voss, Representative Samantha Kirkman, immediately held a press conference saying, we're disappointed, but how disappointed are they? Will they extract some retribution in the state budget for this decision, or other political retribution?
I don't know about that. I mean, what can they do? There's no way. The governor had sole decision-making authority there. I don't think there's anything the legislature could do. I suppose they could try to pass a statute that would say in the future the legislature has to have a voice in it, but that could be vetoed by the governor, and that's not going to bring back the Menominee Casino. As far as I understand, they would have to restart the process, which takes years to get federal approval. You don't know who the next president will be. You don't know what their chances of that would be. But certainly the legislators from the area are going to be disappointed. Hugely popular issue with constituents down there. They've got to be where their voters are.
All right.
There's a budgetary consideration, too. I mean, there's the conservative Iowans, but I mean, he also doesn't want to cripple his message of being this fiscal reformer who helped balance the budget. So, there's likely not going to be some kind of budget repair bill, but anything he can do to keep the pressure off him when he's writing this next budget is obviously going to help him in Iowa and Wisconsin.
Did he mention the Kenosha budget casino in his speech?
He did not.
To the Romney conservatives?
He did get a lot of clear signals before he made the decision from conservatives in Iowa that they didn't want it. He got a letter from Bob Vander Plaats, who's very influential conservative, especially among social conservatives. And then that was followed up by another letter that was signed by 600 potential caucus goers, including Joni Ernst, the new senator from Iowa, and both the RNC committee members from Iowa. So some pretty heavy influencers there sending that message. He didn't mention it at the same time, it took an issue off the table, right? He couldn't be attacked from conservatives either that day or in the coming months in Iowa.
It was interesting, too, because they had a question and answer space set up for reporters for many of the speakers. Walker didn't take that opportunity, as did a couple others, but he did do one on-camera interview after his speech, and it was with Bob Vander Plaats's organization, The Family Leader. So,
okay. So the governor was not accessible to you Wisconsin-based reporters in Iowa? Was not?
And they were also not, he was not available to the National Press Corps.
Okay.
He just didn't do a press conference.
Okay. Hey, Scott, a new Fiscal Bureau memo says the shortfall on at the end of this biennium on June 30th, do I have the number right, $283.4 million?
Yep.
How much more is that than the last projected?
I think it was 150.
We're up 150?
We're worse off. 150.
Worse off.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, 283 for this biennium. The governor says no budget repair bill. Just going to tighten our belts and instruct agency heads to do what they need to do to make it balanced by June 30th. So we'll see how that shakes out. And then the larger numbers for the coming biennium, which is the budget he'll introduce next week. Still around $2 billion if you account for agency requests. If you back those out, then you're around $650 million for a cost to continue budget shortfall.
Yep. To pay the current bills.
To pay the current bills. So, it's going to be somewhere in between those two, numbers is what he's going to have to deal with. And of course, as we get closer to the budget, there are a number of things that have been leaked out or that he's talked about that are going to be in the budget. To make this thing work, and it's going to be, as Republicans continue to say, it's going to be tough, but we'll see how tough exactly in a week.
Well, prior to getting into the nuts and bolts of what we know about the budget, let me ask this question. If we're 283 down on June 30th, 25 million of that goes away if the Potawatomi ponies up, right? What they've withheld?
I believe that $25 million was not part of that equation, so that's right. It would be improved by $25 million.
Lang's statement has zero for tribal gaming.
And I believe the Potawatomi said on Friday that they would be making that payment.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now let's talk about the budget. What do we know? We're going to merge WEDIC and WEDA. The governor's already talked to employees there. Okay. We'll see how that works out. It's not a huge money saver. What else do we know about the budget?
We know there's a lot of talk about cuts to the University of Wisconsin system. We know the University of Wisconsin system administrators are preparing scenarios of a cut. So it appears that a cut to the UW may be coming down.
Well, let's talk about the UW. The regent said if we're going to absorb the 2-year tuition freeze, we need $95 million upper in GPR. Has it become clear that they're not going to get that, but they could have another budget cut like we did in 2011-13?
Yeah, I don't know about clear, but certainly what we're hearing is that it could be very likely they're going to be cut. We reported on how they've been talking with the governor's office about trying to get some kind of autonomy for things like, any range of things. It's not clear exactly what the governor's going to do. He seems to focus on things like building and different more technical aspects of the university system, but we've also been hearing things that there's discussion of granting them all additional kinds of flexibilities. So what they end up deciding to do is still unknown, but the idea is that in exchange for some kind of reduction in state aid as opposed to an $85 million increase, they would get these additional abilities to try to control their budgets in other ways.
Matt, when you say more autonomy, and that calls up the play by former UW-Madison Chancellor Biddy Martin, who tried to break it off, and that cost her job. So how do you walk that fine line? More autonomy without making taxpayers mad and parents who write tuition checks mad?
Well, in that debate, it was about UW-Madison, and so there was, I think, a little bit more pressure from the other pieces of the system against that little pushback. So with this, it sounds more like a system-wide autonomy of some kind. Again, details are, we can guess at them, but we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, I don't think. Okay. But I think this has been a topic of discussion for so long, going back, before the Walker administration, the university seeking more autonomy from legislative oversight, that it seems like this, with the current state of the budget, with the $2.2 billion deficit that Walker has to fix, these kinds of trade-offs may be where they're looking to help close that gap.
What about the issue of health care and school aids? Are you getting any sense of what the governor might recommend on some of those subjects? Those are big-ticket items, Scott.
Yeah. The most recent thing I remember hearing him say about school aids was, we'll have to see how the budget comes out, see what we've got left at the end, which is not a very encouraging message. If you're advocating for more money on school aids, you know, there are a lot of pressures in this budget. The Medicaid cost to continue, I think, was 700 and something upper.
The DHS asked for an upper of 760.
760, right. So you've got that. You've got expanding the voucher program, which, depending on how you do it, comes with a price tag. You've got, you know, he did unveil this past week a few more details about how he wants to drug test all Medicaid recipients,
public assistance
childless
recipients,
adults, right?
If you're
unemployment,
on jobless benefits,
right? Things that have been contested in federal court in other states as unconstitutional. Not a lot of details on the cost on that. You know, so I think we're shooting in the dark on a lot of these issues. That we don't know a whole lot more today than we did a couple months ago, or even during the campaign, from what he said he was going to do. I think we may find out a little bit more before the address, but I think a lot of it is just going to get dropped on February 3rd.
I was going to say, we've also heard the governor sort of abandon any talk of reducing income taxes. He's focused very squarely on property tax reduction. And in state government, the easy way to do that is to dial down the revenue limits on schools and municipalities. So he is able to, given the way the state's finances are set up, he can reduce property taxes without even giving any extra money to the school systems. Yeah. He might even cut money to the school systems and reduce revenue limits even more.
He can also do a little bit of shell game. You talked about, he has said there's no major income tax cut coming, but he can also put in there a budget that, 4 years out, 3 years out, I would like the top rate reduced and things like that. Patrick, your feeling on budget preview?
Well, I think what these guys said is right. I think that another way to address property taxes is to do what they did a year ago, and that's put more money into the technical schools and then make them back off the property taxes that they levy. I'd be looking to watch that. On Medicaid, every signal he's given is that he likely will meet that request from the Department of Health Services, so that eats up a lot of money. They could do some changes on Medicaid beyond the drug testing, but I don't know what those would be, and anything they do has to get approval from the federal government, and if, as we've seen in the past, they're not always so willing to go along with what the government wants.
Well, you don't expect him to... some GOP governors are finding new ways to get some additional MA costs. You don't look for him to try some new gimmick to try to get more MA, right? He seems pretty dug in on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, well, the other thing we didn't even talk about is transportation funding.
Right.
And what's he going to do there? And, the department has asked for, I can't remember the number now,
$750 million.
Right, $750 million in tax and fee increases.
And then they want 500 plus from the general fund. Excuse me, Scott.
Yeah, so, you've got that, and, he's kind of danced around whether he would, he's more or less ruled out a gas tax increase, but he hasn't said how he'd feel about, higher registration fees on hybrid and electric cars and things like that. So we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like he's kind of boxed himself in with the options that he's excluded, to the point where you wonder if it's going to just be a lot of more borrowing than we've seen in the past. But, he's the one who's going to come out with his budget on February 3rd and let us know. So,
new subject, school accountability. Are Assembly and Senate really that far apart? Can that gap be closed? They have major differences, right? Representative Thiesfeld throws this out and says on the day of the public hearing, oops, it's no longer operative. Are they still as far apart as it seems?
Scott, you're the resident expert here.
This is a great issue. I mean, this is something where they couldn't get an agreement last year. They couldn't 3 years ago. So now they're back, and everybody's saying this is our number one priority. It's SB1, it's AB1, okay? AB1 has sanctions for public schools. You get an F or a D, the time starts ticking. You go down this path where in a number of years you become an independent charter school ultimately. The Senate comes out and says, we're not doing that. After a 12-hour hearing in the Assembly where not a single person testified in support of the idea. Then the governor, adding insult to injury to the supporters of AB1, comes forward and says, I don't like that idea either. And he stands up on Friday at the State Education Convention meeting in Milwaukee in front of district administrators, superintendents, principals, and he says, I don't believe in sanctions for public schools. I think that parents ought to be the ultimate deciders on what happens. So you've got the governor firmly in the camp of the Senate approach, which has a public hearing on Tuesday. Meanwhile, over in the Assembly, you have the Speaker saying, we believe there needs to be sanctions for public schools, while they continue to work on that bill privately to come up with some new approach after the hearing that was overwhelmingly against the first go-around.
First draft. Those seems like insurmountable differences, Scott.
Well, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
I mean, we're dealing with a question here, though. I mean, there's already an accountability system in place that DPI put in place a couple of years ago. This is just codifying it and maybe taking it a step further, tweaking some things. Like, you know, a lot of conservatives don't like the idea that, you know, if you get the top rating, you're you know, significantly exceeds expectations instead of, you know, an A, or so there's semantic issues. I mean, at the end of the day, it seems like it's about being some sensitivity to that criticism that they're expanding the voucher program and they don't have there's no letter grades or there's no rating system for those voucher schools. So they're trying to sort of balance that sensitivity with, you know, with the desire to expand the voucher program. So
that's fascinating. New subject. Democratic Chairman Mike Tate announces he will not seek re-election at the spring convention. You surprised by that, Patrick?
No, not so much. I mean, he's done it for quite a while, 6 years, I think. So just for the time factor, you'd think that there were a lot of people questioning after the big Republican wins in November if he would stay on. So I don't think it's a big surprise to see him go.
Who wants the job? What names are you hearing?
Joe Winnicke obviously was just sort of out of the gate almost after the election. I talked to him a couple days later, and he was, you know, intimating that he was going to run, but he wanted to respect.
I understand, he's kind of generation past. There's a little bit of that.
Well, Jason Ray, he would be the generation of the future. He's very young, much like Mike Tate was very young when
he's a member of the Democratic National Committee.
He is, and he joined that at a very young age. I think he was still in his teens.
Yes.
So, yeah, you've got a big generational shift there between those two candidates.
Winnicke, Jason Ray. What other names? Have you heard any other names, Scott?
I thought there were a couple others floating out there. I think there will be any number of people unless one of those who we've mentioned can, you know, coalesce support. But they don't elect till June, I think, at their meeting. So we still have a few months here.
Right. Okay. Meanwhile, let's talk about the Supreme Court. The what's Scott Ross call it? The Injustice Amendment, the one aimed at Chief Justice Abramson. Now, has that cleared both houses?
Yep.
So that'll be on the April 7th ballot. It's a very simple proposition. Should the Supreme Court justices pick the Chief Justice, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, but there's tremendous backstory there, right? Who wants to talk about that?
Well, it goes by seniority now. It has for 125 years. It's currently held by Chief Justice Shirley Abrahamson. She's the longest-serving Chief Justice in the state's history. She is known nationally. She's a very liberal justice on a court that is controlled by conservatives, and because of sort of her administrative role on the court, she is sometimes able to delay things or put things off or throw roadblocks up to the conservatives. They don't like that. They'd like to replace her with one of their own. By making this change to the Constitution, this is a way to do that. So that's sort of the context in which this happens, and the Democrats are saying you shouldn't be changing the Constitution because you don't like one person. The supporters of it are saying this is a matter, you know, this is how legislative leaders are approved. The court itself should be able to pick its leaders. It's just a matter of simple democracy.
Do we expect third-party groups to come in and try to tip it in favor of a yes vote? Is this on anybody's national agenda? Is Shirley that big of a target for some of these conservative third-party groups?
I know there was a poll not too long ago, I think, on this issue that showed, 60-some% support for having the justices pick their own chief. And we do have also on the April 7th ballot the Justice Bradley versus Judge Daley Supreme Court race, so you'll have that. But, as we know, the spring ballot typically is a very low turnout election, 17%, I think the last one was, something like that. So you don't have a lot of people coming out to vote on these issues. So, if some money were put in one way or the other, it could have an effect.
Thanks, Scott. Now let's talk.
Well,
go
I
ahead,
think
Patrick.
if you saw third-party money, it would be far more likely to go toward that Supreme Court race than it would to a ballot measure.
Well, any third-party conservative money would back Rock County Judge James Daley, correct?
Any conservative third-party money would,
right.
yes, and there could be counteracting money from liberals to support Justice
we're
Bradley.
very early in the campaign for the Supreme Court, but is it clear to you, have Judge Daley and Justice Ann Walsh Bradley, have they begun to stake out differences between them?
Sure. I mean, Judge Daley has been very critical of she's been on the court for 20 years. He's been on the bench for a long time in Rock County. He's criticized her on her dissent in Act 10, which was the decision upheld the restrictions on public sector collective bargaining. She was She voted in dissent against that ruling. Same thing with voter ID.
Yes.
The court upheld it. She was in dissent. He's criticized her for that. And then this lead paint decision from 2005, he's been critical of that. So he's taking a line that's very similar to the positions that conservatives have taken for the last 6-8 years.
But he was asked about whether he would back civil rights decisions from the 1960s, Patrick?
Yeah, he was.
What was that about?
So last week he spoke to the Wisconsin Technology Council, and when he was there, he was saying that how judges need to defer to the legislature and they shouldn't put their own opinions in, and they should be reluctant to strike down laws. And so afterward, he talked to reporters and was asked, well, when are the cases when judges should overturn laws and make policy decisions? Do you agree, for instance, with the 1960s civil rights decisions? And he stated 2 or 3 times, I have no opinion on those decisions. I have no opinion on those decisions. But then when he was pressed, he went on to say, well, decisions like that resulted in Barack Obama becoming president. How could that be a bad result? And then people said, well, you say you have no opinion, and you just made that comment. And he said, well, I do think that we were in difficult times, and there were things that were clearly wrong, like Jim Crow laws, and those decisions helped ameliorate those problems.
Does Daley back the constitutional amendment on the April 7th ballot that
Yes.
and Justice Ann Walsh Bradley wants to keep the current system?
Correct.
Okay. Meanwhile, hope you guys didn't drive 70 miles an hour to get here, but there's a bill that will allow that now. So that's back. Is that a serious contender?
I thought it was interesting the day that they came out with, I think it was Senator Petrowski and Representative Tittle came out.
Paul Tittle.
I just saw that there was a sheet about sort of promoting the idea, and you had Wisconsin in blue surrounded by like the Midwest, Great Plains were all like these red states where they had 70 miles per hour, and I just it seemed like the message was make Wisconsin a red state, raise the speed limit to 70 miles per hour, and it was just like, I mean, driving to Iowa over the weekend, I certainly was I was actually on state on U.S. highways,
You
but
certainly were following the speed limit,
but
which is what in Iowa, 70?
It's 70.
70. Okay. We're almost out of time. Can I extract from you one thing that you're going to be especially looking for in the governor's budget, which will be unveiled a week from tomorrow? One very interesting decision that he'll have to make in the budget. Who wants to go first? Patrick, you want to go first?
Transportation is the thing I'm going to look to first to see. There's been so much talk for so long about how we have to do something differently. We have to find more revenue for them. All these ideas thrown out that get cast aside by various people. How much money is he going to commit to transportation, and does he find new revenue sources? Does he take money from the general fund? Does he increase borrowing? I want to see what his plan will be.
Matt?
Is this the big, bold budget that he talked about on Saturday?
Yes.
The big line that he said multiple times was,
To win as president, Republicans must go ahead.
Be big and be bold.
Thank
and
you.
That's how he won 3 times in 4 years, and sure enough, he's running, it seems like, for the 4th time in 5 years now. I'm interested if this is a kind of a quiet, don't rock the boat kind of budget, or if we see something major. And I mean, he hasn't really given us an indication so far that he's of what that major thing would be. But given the situation, given that his Department of Administration put out this memo in November saying they had a $2.2 billion deficit, that's the exact same number that the Doyle administration put out back in 2010, right before Walker took office and blew up the state. So, it seems like it's another time when you're going to need a big, bold idea. But what will it be? That's my question.
Scott?
Mine will all be in the area of public education. What does he do with vouchers? What does he do with school aids? And how does that interplay with the promised property tax cut that he wants to do? All kind of interrelated.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. We have a lot to cover. Scott, Matt, Patrick, thanks very much. We got to get you guys before you're off to New Hampshire, so thanks very much for doing the show.
Thanks, Steve.